Okay, so welcome people viewing on Hildebrand to the briefing room, which was the name we eventually settled on, having gone through a series of various choices, some of which were very pretentious, some of which were extremely suggestive, and most of those came from the frankly grubby mind of Ian Douglas. So who's joining us today. We've settled on the briefing room, which is the first Hildebrand Zoomcast. And it's a chance really to discuss preferences about different aspects of Bond, our thoughts on certain periods and certain parts of the films. And each week we'll be bringing in different admins and different special guests to join us in these discussions. But my regular co-host will be, I would say, the voice of reason on Hildebrand, and also the man who produces our frankly fantastic artwork, which looks, amazing every time he does it. Keeps coming up with these fantastic ideas. He's the kind of person who would be there to stop you doing something daft or saying something daft, and someone to offer a counterbalance, which the group really appreciates. So, co-host Ian Lasky.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm not entirely sure that I can be that same balance all the time, and I'm not entirely sure I am sane, not with all this lockdown.
I think we're going to discover that in the next hour, I should think.
Yeah,
we will see. Okay, and we're going to be bringing in different people each week. It won't just be people talking about the thing they are most passionate about. It's going to be people talking about things in general, and it might be people just to provide a little bit of balance each time we discuss things. And the next person I'm going to introduce you to is something of a Bond traditionalist, a literary fan, and I would describe him as a self-proclaimed Scotsman, Ian Douglas.
Hello. Hello.
And our first special guest, who is joining us for the first briefing room, is a man who is very, very passionate about A View to a Kill, and very, very passionate about Nottingham Forest. So really, he really likes things that were only successful last time in the 80s. So James Scott.
That's me. You got me down to a T there, young man. Glad to be of assistance tonight.
Okay.
Bearing in mind, I can only talk about things from the 80s.
That's fine. That's fine. Ian Lasky, would you just like to let us know about what your kind of thoughts were behind setting up the kind of top 5 approach to doing things, and how it might work in the weeks ahead?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think the way I viewed this particular top 5 as is to rank the movies myself that we're going to discuss today, the first 5 Bond films, in order of how I enjoy them. Because I think sometimes I think we all like, as fans, top 10s, top 5s. Even when we say we hate them, we actually really like them, because we like to see how they compare to what we think. We like to disagree with them. We like to take them a bit too seriously. But I think that I personally have always had a slight problem labeling things the best, because I'm not entirely sure how you do that. So my opinion is, these are the films that I'm not saying these are going to be what I think are the best Bond films from this 5, but I'm ranking them in terms of how much I enjoy sitting down and watching them, and have done particularly for now, the best part of 46 years. So that's my opinion. And I think, James, correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine that's probably how you've tackled this. Or
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what I want to do. Bearing in mind, my favourite film is A View to a Kill. I fully appreciate that it by no means is the best. So I'm going full in with that attitude with this. I think there's going to be some surprises tonight.
Yeah, I think
there'll be some surprises.
I think you're probably right, and that was very much our view. Is that there are some people on the groups, fans, who have probably got the best and the favourites more or less in line, and they are one and the same. But I don't think that's going to be the case tonight. So this is really about the ones we enjoy the most. For whatever reason, they've ended up being our favourite out of those 5. But unfortunately, there is an elephant in the room that we need to tackle before we go on, which is the fact that there will be a purist element out there who are now thinking, well, hang on a minute. They are the sole members of a particular cult who believe in the twin non-Eon productions of that time, the Casino Royale features. I will say that because obviously one of them was a kind of TV drama. So bearing that in mind, and we don't want these people to rise up and become angry in their numbers, the first thing I'm going to ask is, would any of you, having considered this and realising that actually both of them, if you looked at them in different ways, could count as one of the first 5, would there be any of you who would have subbed off any of the choices of the 5 and brought on either of the Casino Royales to make the top 5?
Absolutely not. No chance. I mean, I quite like both, but I love, the first 5 Sean Connery films. So they're part of my top 10.
Yeah.
I'm fine with the 2 earlier Casino Royale films, but yeah, they're not on the same level for me. So no, not for me.
I tell you what, I would. Oh, sorry, I was going to say what I would say is if we were to do a top 5 purely based on the soundtracks, I would very much have Casino Royale, the spoof version, high up in the 5, because I think the music for that, as anachronistic as it is wonderful, and I think it has probably one of the best songs ever written for a Bond film in it, with The Look of Love. As a film, though, I don't particularly enjoy it. I struggle with it, so I wouldn't consider it. And I've only ever watched it. I know this is blasphemous to say, but I've only ever watched the TV version with Barry once, and I don't remember enough about it to feel qualified to put it in my list.
I can't really add any extra to what you guys have both said. I think you both nailed it. And I especially agree about the music. I think the Casino Royale 67, that's the one quality that I can offer.
And it also possibly has the most accomplished cast of any Bond film by a long, long way. When you look at who's in it, but what a wasted opportunity, but what an amazing cast of talent there.
Agreed.
Twinned with, I think it was it 237 directors or something like that. It was a colossal amount of directors. But Orson Welles, David Niven, Woody Allen, Peter Sellers.
Yeah.
Incredible.
I think I directed a scene in it. Actually, everyone was involved.
Yeah. Hang on. You've missed the icon. You've missed the true icon.
I know
Ronnie Corbett. Ronnie Corbett.
Bridge users. Okay, well, we're gonna hand it over now to. We thought special guest first, so we're gonna ask James Scott. Hopefully, this will work using the appliance of little pieces of paper. But would you like to say and let us know which of the films you have rated at number 5?
So I'm just going to reveal the card. Is that how you want me to do it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So
Ah.
I don't know whether that's a surprise. Can you see that? Or is that back in front? Yeah, Thunderball. Yeah.
Okay.
2 words.
James,
Yeah, that's right.
James, before we ask your reasoning behind that and your reasons why, can I ask if any of the 2 Ians also have Thunderball, or myself, obviously? Now is the time to hold up that card.
Wow.
Not me.
Oh, right. Well,
Great minds, Alex.
Let's put the cat amongst the pigeons. James Scott, why 5th for Thunderball?
I think out of the 5, I mean, I want to say straight away, I think it's probably the best run of 5 films. But I don't know whether you want to talk about that later. And it's hard to pick one that goes bottom. But for me, it's probably the grandest on scale. I thought about this on the way home tonight. And I remember feeling with Spencer that if I'd have been alive in 1965, I would have come out of the cinema absolutely elated and thought, grand scale, it's got everything. But then, back beneath the surface, something is missing. and I think it's quite dull. And I really, really don't like saying that, but I just think that everything's there, but just something's missing. And I don't like to call Connery here, but I think he's very, very safe in this role. I think he plays it really, really. You can tell he's very, very comfortable, which isn't necessarily criticism, but I think he's just coasting it a little bit, if I can say that. Everything's just too. There's just something missing. I don't know if anyone can help me here, but
no, I mean, you're echoing exactly what I think about it. I mean, I always feel with Thunderball that whenever I do revisit it, it's all every time I revisit it, I think this is the time I'm going to finally get this film and seeing it what everybody else sees, and I always come away feeling it was all right. I do agree. I think you're spot on. I do find it a bit dull. And I know a lot of people talk about the underwater sequences as being a bit slow paced in that, and I have no problem with that, because I love movies like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and stuff, where you expect those kind of slow moving underwater action scenes. It's the rest of the film I feel is a bit. It feels like, I think sometimes the Bond films can be accused of being a little bit bloated at times, and Thunderball feels like the first slightly bloated Bond film for me.
Yeah.
And it also feels like, we're going to talk about them later on, obviously, in this list, but the films that came before it had really colourful characters and villains and interesting henchmen and henchwomen and all of that. Yet Thunderball feels like, Largo, he's really boring. He's just a heavy. And Domino, she's beautiful, but
yeah,
she's not as colourful as the other as characters before or after. So I totally get it that it's an iconic film, particularly because it's the first true villains wanting to take over the world kind of Bond film. Nuclear bombs threatening to blow up major cities and all that. And on scale, I agree with you, it's brilliant in terms of scale, but it just feels it lacks spark.
There's some classic elements, isn't there? The round table of the 007 agents, and the M in the background, and
do you think it's a film that was when I see it, I always think of the Technicolor sign. And
yes,
it strikes it as a widescreen film that at the time going to see it at the time must have looked mind blowing.
I think
it must have looked absolutely fantastic, but it sort of feels almost like that over the actual storyline and substance of the film. Really, it's almost at the expense of it. And obviously now looking back, there are probably lots of films that look that good, but I can understand it at the time. It must have been like a cinematic experience. But I'm in agreement with both of you, is that the pacing I find difficult. For me, I think there's a few things that should have just been cut down, edited out, and you can ding now, because it'll be the first count of mentioning it. When you've got two films, well, actually, I know it's not. We'll be talking about probably another film later that's essentially got the same storyline as a couple of others. But when you've got two films based on exactly the same story, and you prefer the other one, which I do prefer Never Say Never Again, because I just think it's a funnier, more entertaining film, then the other one suffers. And I know I went with Ian Douglas to the Cinema Museum to watch a special presentation of it, and I kept looking at my watch, and that's never a good sign for any film, because I just thought this seems to be not much is happening, and it's taking a long time not to happen. Is basically what it felt like. And I agree with James as well that Connery's performance in Goldfinger is laid back. In Thunderball, he's almost too laid back. It's it doesn't seem natural. So I kind of agree with that as well. But Ian Douglas, you may want to save your comments for later.
Okay, I will do. No, I do. No, I'll just say one thing, is that I think the first time I saw it, I saw it on TV when I was about 14, and I agree. It was the first Bond film that I thought was a little bit boring. But when I've seen it since, and I've seen it quite a few times, I now enjoy the underwater scenes. I think it's beautiful. It's a film that you can just immerse yourself in, because it's spectacular to look at. I mean, as you say, you know, it would have been visually stunning at the time, and there's lots I like about it. But I'll say no more for now.
Okay. So we're going to move on to film, or the films in our fourth position.
Can I just ask, out of curiosity, Ian, what was your number 5?
Oh, yeah, your fifth.
My fifth was...
Oh, I thought you were just going to say, no, I'm not going to tell you.
I haven't quite worked out this, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's
Dr.
fine.
And
Ian,
I love
briefly, Ian, why Dr. No in fifth?
I mean, I love it. It's a great film, but I just prefer the other 4. I think I do have a favourite. I have 3 that are very close together, and then Dr. No is just slightly behind those. I just think there are better Sean Connery films in the 60s. I think he improved, the films improved as they went along. I think Dr. No lacked soundtrack like the others had. It's a very simple story and it works very well, but yeah, I like it, but just not as much as the others.
Okay, we're going to move on to film 4, and it's my turn to do the first one. So ready?
Wow.
Yeah. I have to say, this was a really weird experience trying to think through the 5. Well, it's just 5. It felt very strange. And my reasoning behind it is not very logical, because I think through it, and I think through Goldfinger, and I think, well, it's incredibly iconic. It's a fantastic looking film. All the elements that go on to so many of the later films have already slotted into place. It started to have the kind of comic henchman, which I always like a slightly kind of cartoon henchman. You've got those set pieces that are just amazing. You've got the Aston there. The suits look fantastic. Connery's in absolute overdrive, really, in terms of the part. I don't enjoy it as much, because parts of it feel very passive, where I'm not really sure that there's very much going on. He seems like I know it's widely said, he seems almost like a sort of guest who's just hanging around half the time. And it's one of those as well that kind of finishes quite abruptly and conveniently. And I just don't enjoy it. And although I enjoy some of the films and the start, for instance, of Goldfinger in the more glamorous parts of America, I don't really enjoy them so much in the other parts of America, even though obviously it wasn't filmed there. So I was very surprised that came forth. And I'm still not quite sure it's the right decision, because if someone was to say to me, what are the best Bond films, it would probably be in the top 3. So I don't really know how it works. So yeah, but Goldfinger is my number 4. Anyone else got Goldfinger at number 4?
No.
Get out of here.
Okay.
Red card.
Well, there it is. So Ian Douglas, if you had Dr. No at number 5, can I ask if you've got Thunderball at number 4?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. So everyone has... Thunderball has been voted for by everyone. So really, it's over to James to say what your number 4 is.
Only live twice.
Okay. Right.
Do you want to explain why?
Briefly, yeah.
Or, yeah. Similar reasons to Thunderball. I think that it's got iconic scenes, and I do enjoy it. I just think it's really, really bloated, and I don't. When I was a kid, it was probably one of my favourites, but I don't think it's lasted the test of time in that sense. And I really, really don't like Sean's rushing forward of his Japanese hairstyle thing going on. That really, really annoys me.
Is that just hair jealousy?
Yes, it is. Yeah, but no,
when you're hair jealous of Sean Connery, Times are
Yeah.
You're in trouble.
yeah,
Yeah.
you really are.
Mm.
Just remembering hair.
It's overrated.
And
Because
with
when you
that,
can't get a haircut.
yeah.
Yeah.
And with that, James is frozen. Just
I'm here.
Oh, you're back.
I'm here.
I thought you were just daydreaming about hair just for a minute. But it all came back to, okay. So you only live twice at fourth. Ian Lasky. Okay.
I can't see what Ian put.
He's got Dr. No.
Dr.
Oh,
No.
okay.
Dr. No.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
No?
I kind of feel like I shouldn't have. I kind of feel it should always be higher because it is really the most important one. You know, it's the film that started it all. Without it, and I think it's a really good little Bond film. And I, like you said, Alex, I like the fact with Dr. No, for instance, that all the elements are pretty much there. You know, or the relationship with Moneypenny and Bond feels lived in already, and it's the first film. The relationship between Bond and M feels lived in, and all this.
Yeah.
And it's just then obviously the other films then find their feet a bit more. And yes, you do lack the music and you like the scale, but it's only 4 because the other 3 I just enjoy that a little bit more, to be honest.
I mean, the thing is, you are talking about, as James said at the beginning, you're talking about 5 films that would all be in the reckoning for top 10, certainly, quite easily. So it's quite a difficult one, really. Okay, so we're going to move on to what's in third place, and it's Ian Douglas who's going first with this one. So, Ian, your third place film?
My third place film, which is second or third, because I have 2 joint seconds, is You Only Live Twice.
You Only Live Twice.
Yeah.
Okay.
For years, I think Goldfinger was my favourite for probably the first Bond film that I saw on TV with my parents. But more recently, I think You Only Live Twice has appealed to me more. And I think it's possibly because I've seen Goldfinger too many times. You Only Live Twice, I've always liked, but I think in the last 4 or 5 years, I've kind of appreciated certain things about it, like certainly the locations, PTS with the bit out in space, the fake death. I love the score. I think it's one of the best scores, and I really like the theme tune. It does get a lot of criticism. It's clearly flawed in parts, and a lot of people criticise it for the weird kind of, as James was describing, Connery's hair as he's being turned Japanese, which is obviously a weird thing, but the one defence I would say for that was that it appeared in the book. So, you know, that was one part of the book they were fairly true to. So they went with that. It kind of made no sense because he didn't look Japanese at the end of it. He just looked weird, and he was too tall to be, you know, compared to every other Japanese man over there. He looked far too tall, and he was the wrong shape and everything. But there's a lot about it I like, and I think it's probably down to the direction by Lewis Gilbert. It's just visually, a lot of it is the location, but visually it's lovely to look at. I love the whole Kobe Doc scene. I love that. The music in it is superb at that scene. I love the girls in it. You know, the sets are great. Villains there, the volcano lair. You have a Blofeld who, for years, was quite iconic, but more recently has started to look a bit caricaturey because of obviously things like Austin Powers. But I just find it a very entertaining film, very pleasant to look at, very satisfying.
Yeah.
You know, I'd say my only real objection to it is how weird Bond looked when he was getting married as a Japanese fisherman. Otherwise, I don't really have a problem with it. I think it's a great film, and I'd say it's at the moment between that and Goldfinger, I'd probably want to watch this more than Goldfinger. Haven't seen it as many times. I think it's a great film.
Okay.
So that as Third at the moment, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Has anyone got a film in third that so far hasn't been mentioned by anyone else? So have I.
So have I.
You go first then, sir. Well,
well, there we go.
Sure.
I mean, this is the thing with this is about enjoyment and what your favourite is. Yeah. And I think I'd probably say it's the best Bond film. You know,
it's probably arguably the best Fleming adaptation.
Yes, and also I think it's wonderful as a one-off espionage film, and that kind of Hitchcock look and how stylish it is. It's fantastic. But I was a bit surprised. I have never watched it back to back with Dr. No, and having watched it back to back with Dr. No, they're very much of a piece. And what Dr. No lacks in an ending, From Russia with Love lacks in a beginning. And so I just found that there wasn't a great deal in it. So, yeah, in terms of how much I enjoy a film, it's a strange one. I think we'll probably talk about From Russia with Love in more detail later, because obviously it's going to be higher in at least one of the charts. But I do find it's one of those films that rates incredibly highly and no one really ever talks about.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
I agree. I agree. I mean, do you want to say my piece now or save it till later?
I do, yeah.
I watched it last night in the watch along, and I really found it quite dull in places. And I don't like saying that. I don't, you know. I think there's some. I think Connery, even though I love his performance in Doctor No, I think he's really enjoying himself in From Russia with Love, and that's a big plus from it. And I think the cast is probably one of the best casts of the series. But there's just something about it that I find I can't say boring, but I don't know. It doesn't grasp my interest.
I think for me, it on the plus side, it's very, very well directed, and there is a noticeable leap in production value and scale and style and technique between Doctor No and From Russia with Love. You know, you could have easily afford there were 2 or 3 films between them to get to that level, and I think it has 2 of the best villains in the entire series in Rosa Klebb and Red Grant, and I think Shaw is brilliant in this film. I have to slightly disagree with you, Alex, about your comment about the beginning and the ending, because one of my issues with the film has always been, I've always felt it does have a bit of a lackluster ending. That once you've hit the Orient Express in that fight, the film seems to fizzle out. And where you can see that it's still a relatively low budget film compared to what comes later is that whole lake sequence with the boats. It just doesn't feel, you know, the story about the helicopter crashing with the director on board while they were filming it into that lake is probably more exciting than the actual scene. Yeah. That's probably heresy. I probably shouldn't have said that. And I'd never liked the gypsy stuff, the gypsy camp bit. Yeah. I've just never liked it. Always feels like an interlude that was totally unnecessary. It just sort of slows the film down.
Yeah.
And I can only be honest.
Ian, I agree.
Yeah, it's just take that out, you know. But likewise, if you were to say to me what is one of the best Bond films, it would have to be very, very, very high up there. I just don't enjoy it as much.
I mean, you picked me up on the ending. I think I'm going to pick you up on the gypsy fight, which I think should have been extended to probably an hour. Or maybe give an example. You know, I don't know. But yeah, I get what you're meaning. So what we're saying is between this, we don't think it's got a very good beginning or end.
or a bit in the middle.
I think this bit is going to go down very badly. I think let's reiterate, like we've said several times, these are 5 exceptionally strong films in the series. And when we're saying we're placing this slightly lower than most people expect, it's like a hair's width between them. But also, I mean, we noticed yesterday, I've never noticed before, that it's, you know, except for Connery.
Yeah.
He doesn't appear until about 18 minutes into the film, which is quite a short film. It's strange.
Now, I'd forgotten about that, Alex. I know Connery appears in the first 2 minutes. So, yeah. But the fact that James Bond doesn't appear until 18 minutes, I think it was quite a brave decision. And one I'd not seen From Russia with Love for a number of years, and I'd forgotten that. So
that kind of makes sense because that's following the book. So I think it works.
Yeah, I think it did work. I was just surprised. I think it was brave of them to do that. Bearing in mind the second film, the audience want to see Bond. So for him not to come in at 18 minutes, I think that, it was a bit of a surprise.
Imagine if they'd done that with The Spy Who Loved Me. Wow. Which wasn't there. Okay. Right. We've all done third, haven't we?
Yes.
Okay. So Ian Lasky, we're on to which film you have at number 2.
So obviously this is also going to tip everybody that's keeping track as to what my number 1 will be. But number 2 is Goldfinger.
Nice.
I did and ah for a little bit between whether or not to flip From Russia with Love and Goldfinger. Like I say, it's just a hair's width between the two of them. But I think for me, Goldfinger is just more of a satisfying, complete film. And I think it's really nicely paced. And I think Guy Hamilton gets a lot of stick from Bond fans and people on the forum because he doesn't lack the visual style of Terence Young in that. But I will say, I do think that there is a zest to Goldfinger that is noticeable. Oh, hello. We have a finger pointing up.
Really? Fantastic director.
Yeah. I agree.
He just went on to bigger things, it's just testing out with that film.
Yeah, no, and I for me, I think he's really good with actors. He was really good with actors. And I think the first reason why this slightly out tips From Russia with Love is that I just think it's a more enjoyable experience for me from beginning to end. It's more consistent. And the second thing is I just think Goldfinger's terrific as a character. And I think he may not be my favorite Bond villain of all time, but I think he's the definitive Bond villain. He's the Bond villain that everybody from that point on is being compared against. And he carries an awful lot of this film and he's really engaging, which is why when I compare him to a character like Largo in Thunderball, there's just no comparison to him.
Yeah, you're right.
Absolutely. Okay, I think nearly everyone else has got that film. Has anyone got that film at number 2? Or a film we haven't yet mentioned at number 2?
I've got Goldfinger.
Very complicated now. Goldfinger. Okay.
Oh, George, what my number 2 is? My number 2?
Yeah.
Dr. No.
Oh, strong.
Yep. Dr. No. My Dr. No. The reason I like it so much, and I think I put it in a review on the group, it was just the film I just watched over and over and over and over and over again when I was little. No reason except, and this, I was saying the other day about not wanting to kind of base things too much on nostalgia, but it's really difficult when you have a small number of Bond films on VHS when you're growing up and you watch them over and over and over and over again. In the same way that kind of Star Wars I've watched over and over and over again. It kind of makes it too over familiar, and then you don't necessarily watch it too much after that. But there was Dr. No, You Only Live Twice, Diamonds Are Forever, Spy Who Loved Me, and For Your Eyes Only. Oh, and Moonraker. And those were the ones I just watched over and over again. And Dr. No was the only one I had on my own VHS, and I absolutely loved that. I didn't have to go downstairs and get it. I had my own tape of Dr. No, and I loved it. I loved that film. And I can't remember thinking it looked old. I can't remember thinking it didn't look as expensive. I just remember thinking what a fantastic action film it was. And I didn't watch it for years, and probably have only watched it 2 or 3 times in the last 10, 12 years. And I watched it the other night. I was looking forward to watching it. I watched it on Blu-ray, which made a massive difference. And I just thought, what a lovely little film. What a fantastic little film. And I don't know if Bond hadn't continued or it hadn't been successful, whether anyone would talk about Dr. No. I don't really mind. I just thought, what a clever, brilliant little film. And I just kind of came out of that thinking, I'm not surprised it was the launch pad for everything that followed. And fantastic, really enjoyed it.
Yeah,
It wouldn't.
It's a very
Sorry.
Sorry. I was just going to say, it's a very simple plot. It's very true to the book, apart from the giant squid. But it just works so perfectly. And I agree. I've, as a child, I saw it more than any other Bond film I saw. And possibly I got a bit bored of it because I kept seeing the same thing. But it is a very pure, simple, clean Bond film. There's nothing to really fault it, apart from you could say that the production values aren't that high, but then the budget was very low. So, you know, for the money, I'd say it's probably the best Bond film.
You mentioned the giant squid, and one thing I'd say about Dr. No, which I'll also say about Goldfinger, is that I actually think they're very close to the novels, but they improve on the novels by making key changes.
Yeah.
You know, in Goldfinger, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been many, many years since I've read it, but it was basically a bank heist. What I liked about Goldfinger, the movie, was that it became more sophisticated than that. It was, you know, let's irradiate the gold with a bomb, which is really cool. And in Dr. No, I'm kind of glad they didn't do the squid, because that always struck me in the novel as being a bit too much. But you get a proper villain's death in the film. You know, the book, having him being crushed by bird crap. You know, it works within the context of the novel, but it would be very anticlimactic in a film. But having him sort of, you know, it's preposterous that they've got a cooling radiation pool in the middle of an open reactor room. But having him not being able to climb out because of his metal hands and all that, it's just brilliantly poetic.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
What I love about Doctor No is, and when we watched it last week on the Watchathon, was that I hadn't seen it for a number of years, and like what's already been said, you sort of just accept Doctor No, that it's there. Not many people talk about it on the group. And what I took away from it was just the sensational casting of Sean Connery. I mean, at no point do I ever think someone else should have played that part. He's just, you feel like he's been playing James Bond for years. Yeah. And I think the fact that he makes it look so easy is such a massive testament to the production, casting, everything that goes with that.
You're right in that as well, is that because I think I put in a review, he arrives fully formed, and kind of, as you watch him, even in those early stages, you've got no doubt he's done loads of stuff. You've got no doubt he's James Bond and he's got a history. And to do that without actually having to explain any of it is really, really amazing. And
that's what I love about it.
A testament to the director as well. So yeah, fantastic.
And there's some really, really clever editing in that film. And there's some really top-notch sound design in that film as well. So on a technical level, it's a very, very accomplished film.
Yeah, I agree.
Have we all done our two? Or Ian Douglas, have you got your two? Or have you done
it? Two's Goldfinger.
Okay.
It's joint Goldfinger and You Only Live Twice. So it's, so I've done my two, really.
Okay. So all that remains, apart from to kind of discuss how it would differ from what we think are the best ones, is what our favourite one is. And I think we should do this at the same time and do a 1, 2, 3.
Goldfinger.
From Russia with love.
Okay.
Right. So, well, that is unexpected. Two of us have gone for You Only Live Twice. So we'll get to that in a minute. Ian Douglas, from Russia with Love, anything you'd like to add about From Russia with Love that wasn't said when it was lower on other lists?
It's very true to the book. My two favourite books of the series are this and Majesties, and I think they're two of the best films. I think they follow...
You're freezing on me there, Ian. It was From Russia with Love, and we didn't get that second one. What was that?
On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Yeah. Never say never again.
I thought, yeah, brilliant. That's what I thought. Thanks. Thanks for
that.
that. We can edit out that other thing you said when we transmit this. Thanks for that, Ian. James.
Yeah, I love Goldfinger. It took me a while to. A lot of people go on about that Bond doesn't do anything in this film, and I get that, but it's just too iconic not to love.
I said that.
And odd job. When I was a kid, you know, he's the man.
Yeah,
he's absolutely the man. Well, Goldfinger was a man, but the just and I can never get my head round that Gertrude was dubbed in the movie.
Yeah,
that's magnificent dubbing.
Yeah.
The song's iconic. The score's iconic. Sean, I would argue he looks his best in all the films in this.
Yeah, I'd agree.
In Goldfinger, he's just immense. It's just every scene's iconic. The car's iconic. The girls are iconic. I think it's a bit of a bullseye for me.
Just to say one thing, I think it's interesting that, and it's been mentioned a couple of times that the Bond doesn't do much in this movie, and yet, you know, absolutely as a plot point, you know, he spends a lot of the film, you know, catching up or captured or whatever. But I think at no point watching that movie do I feel that Bond, or Connery in particular, is not in complete control of everything that's going on. You know, there's just some kind of cool presence about him that even when he is completely out, he is nowhere in control. He feels like he is.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the strengths of the film.
Yeah. I would call it Blueprint Bond. I genuinely believe that without Goldfinger, we may not have had what happened later in the series. The iconic villain, the iconic henchman, the iconic song.
I mean, we certainly wouldn't have had A View to a Kill, would we, James?
We certainly wouldn't, and that's why I love it so much, because it's a predecessor to Attack.
A predecessor, I like that. That's a nice way of putting it.
It's
without Goldfinger, yes. Without Goldfinger, you would not have had. Come on, Alex, just for me. Do your Christopher Walken impression. Yeah. Do it for me.
And I'm not doing it. I'm going to save that. I'm not doing it. I'm going to say it. I'm saving that for Abtech. The thing about Goldfinger, it won the poll last year where it hadn't done so well in previous years. So it seems whether it's just as it happened, but it seems to be coming back into fashion. One of the other films from Russia with Love that Ian will talk about, or has put as his number one, 3 times out of 5 years From Russia with Love came top. So in those 2 films, you are talking about films that are seriously respected in the Bond community. I think the difference with Goldfinger is that everyone knows Goldfinger. It doesn't. It's one of those films that whether it's on wherever, it's instantly recognisable, and anyone, even people who don't like Bond, if they're asked to name a Bond film,
I was going to say this.
Normally, would probably say Goldfinger. Yeah. It's incredibly iconic, isn't it?
I think if on the game show Pointless, you was to ask what would be the highest scoring film, I think that would you'd get Goldfinger without get 98 points or something.
Yeah. Fantastic. Ian Lasky, You Only Live Twice.
You Only Live Twice. Yeah. I think for me, the journey to Bond as a kid came from sci-fi. You know, first and foremost, growing up as a kid, I'm you know, like all of us, I was the Star Wars generation. So I really got into sci-fi. So I fell, as it were, for the Bond films that had more of that fantasy sci-fi charm. You know, Doctor No's got sci-fi. But obviously, You Only Live Twice, Spy Who Loved Me, Moonraker, those are the big fantasy Bond films. But I think You Only Live Twice is actually a really important Bond film. I think it's a film that I can sit down and enjoy from beginning to end. There's no point in this movie where I get a bit fidgety or bored. or start looking at my watch. But I think it's a really important film. We just talked about Goldfinger being the blueprint Bond film in many ways. Yeah, exactly. I think You Only Live Twice is very much a blueprint Bond film too, but it's a blueprint for the Bond films that took it's the point where the Bond films diverged from Fleming and became its own thing. Yep. This is where Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman said, okay, now we're going to make a Scream Bond film and we're going to do it the way we want to make it. And I can understand why a lot of fans dislike that, because it ditches so much of the original novel. I can totally understand why they dislike the fact that it throws out the continuity with Majesties and so on. But as a piece of cinema, Bond, I think it's absolutely top notch. You do have the villain in Blofeld that is still iconic today. The reason why he's parodied so much is because he is the most iconic. You have some of the most amazing. I mean, I completely agree with you, Ian Douglas, about the Kobe dock scene. That is just a wonderful piece of direction. You have this elaborate fight scene, this multiple fight scene, where instead of going close into the action, Lewis Gilbert goes, no, I'm going to crane off in the helicopter. And so you can see it on this massive grand scale. And it's brilliant. I also think this has got the best Bond girl or Bond leading lady of the Connery era for me in Aki. And the only false note, I think, the full step the movie makes for me is by killing her off. She should have made it through to the end.
He gets over her very quickly, doesn't he?
He does. And also, I know this is a film that will be discussed later on these top fives, but it does slightly bug me that everybody talks about Triple X from The Spy Who Loved Me as being the first Bond lady who was Bond's equal. And you go, well, what about Aki? She was a female agent. She was just as competent. We didn't see it in massive action scenes necessarily, but she's equally Bond's equal. But I think because she dies, people kind of sort of disregard her. I love Donald Pleasance. I mean, he's just brilliant. To me, he is the definitive Blofeld for me. I do agree that he wouldn't have worked in a film like Majesties, though, but that's a different conversation. But Alex, do you share the love?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's it surprised me really when I was kind of going round and round thinking about them, that was the one that would come out as the one that I think is the one I enjoy the most, that is my favourite. And part of that, I completely agree with you in that with the possible exception of Majesties, there is no way on earth that the Bond series could have continued being as successful as it was by sticking to Fleming. I just don't think it would have been feasible. It would have been dated. And I love the fact that You Only Live Twice doesn't just go a bit away from Fleming. The Roald Dahl element just makes it a fantasy film. And
fantastical, yeah.
Yeah, and I love the fact that we talked about the iconic elements being there in Goldfinger. We talked about the basic elements being there in Dr. No. But the things that people, caricature elements, I don't know and I don't really care. I just love the fact that it just thinks we're going massive on this. And Lewis Gilbert is the man who makes that happen in all his films. And they're the films that you think, if you just want to sit down and enjoy and have fun watching a James Bond film, then You Only Live Twice and Spy and Moonraker are fantastic voices. And I love the fact that Ian said, in terms of directing it, he makes some really brave but slightly lunatic choices in the things that happen. And you think, oh, great. I mean, I know you've got like the monorail, you've got the hollowed out volcano, you've basically got the blueprint for Dr. Evil. You've got all those things, and you've got Sean Connery. I think people talk about him looking kind of bored and puffy, and I don't get that at all. I just don't get that.
No, I don't.
Phoning it in is the phrase.
What's that? Phoning it in. Yeah, phoning it in. Was he phoning it in?
Which I don't agree with. But
no, I just think he's. I think he looks more like he's, if anything, started to realise that it's all a little bit ridiculous. I would say that there's a slight hint of that going on there. But most of that film, I think, he just is colossal in it, really, in a great way. And I agree with Ian as well that Aki, what a fantastic Bond girl, really just playing it understated but having a really important role is great, and it just builds towards the classic Bond climax. Really,
and also it has this obviously the reputation of being the first mega. It's Bond as spectacle. You know, it's massive. The set, you know, the 007 soundstage, the volcano. You know, it's a movie about rockets eating rockets. But it also has these cool little moments. You know, the Henderson cameo character is brilliant. That's a brilliantly wonderful little scene. I really liked Haga Tanaka in it. And it's actually, I wish something more had been done with that character. It would have been kind of cool had he been revisited at some point later in the series. There's that fight scene in the office building between Connery and it's just brilliantly choreographed. Yes, exactly. It's beautifully choreographed.
I remember being when I was younger, just being fascinated by those Spats shoes that he wears, and you're like running around. The worst shoes to wear on any floor, let alone that floor. Fantastic though. Just and they're kind of
with the face mask.
The face mask. As if somehow this 6'3" Scotsman can in any way impersonate a Japanese guy who's at least a foot shorter than him, but wonderful. You know, he just And I mean, don't be frightened. This isn't a call. This isn't a cry for help.
Oh,
okay. Yeah. This might unfreeze James, hopefully. But little Nelly.
Yeah.
Little Nelly on a big belly. But little Nelly, what a fantastic thing. Fetch me little Nelly. What a wonderful scene that is. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's Bond film as spectacle. It's Bond film as romp. It's just a big romp. But I totally get why people go, it's a little bit too far out for them. But yeah, no, I just love it. And I would quite happily sit down and watch it right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
In fact, I'm going to, no.
No, fantastic.
I think James already has.
Yeah. I quite like the fact that we've got to keep him like that.
Yeah.
That's a keeper. That's a keeper for this. And maybe we'll do some effects or something on that. Do some drawings around him. Before we finish, have you done your what you think would be, objectively speaking, the best 5?
I think for me it would be. Yeah, I would probably go the same. I might slip Dr. No and you own. Yeah.
I'd probably say similar. I think it's very close between From Russia with Love and Goldfinger as the best. Then probably You Only Live Twice, followed by Thunderball. Dr. No is 5th, but you know it's so close between all 5, to be honest. So it wouldn't be too different from my preferred 5.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's a reason why, you know, From Russia with Love has won so many of our polls. And the Goldfinger is the current reigning champ. And I think it's really interesting, though. I have to say one thing. I do think it's really interesting that you do have, you know, arguably the 5 strongest or certainly most important films in the series right at the beginning. But it's interesting how many film series have their best one as their second film. You know, there are definitely a few, but it's really interesting that even after all these years, these decades, that people still gravitate towards the second one as being the best.
Yeah, he's back.
Can
you hear us, James?
I think what's interesting about these 5 films is that you've got 4 with the master that is John Barry scoring them, but the first one hasn't. But obviously, you still got Barry's influence on it, and I think that it is, and that also might be one of the reasons why From Russia with Love and Goldfinger score so high. Is his contribution as well is so iconic to both of those films.
I mean, that might be one of with You Only Live Twice. One of the things I really love about You Only Live Twice is that it looks like a later Bond film in terms of all those elements are there, in terms of the theme. But I love that theme tune, and it's got a really romantic soundtrack. You know, it's
Yeah.
a really lush,
Yeah, I agree.
romantic soundtrack. And that, I think, is one of the things I like about quite a few of the Brosnan films. They've got that kind of lush, romantic sound behind it that isn't just horns blasting and, you know, all those other bits and pieces. And that's one of the things that I think You Only Live Twice does really, really well. I think it's got that lovely sound. James mentioned it earlier. Are they the strongest 5 in a row?
I can't
Yes.
think of a stronger
Yes, I'd
5.
say.
I'd have to say yes. Yeah,
I think so.
they're not necessarily my favourite 5 to sit down. Oh, they probably, I don't know. It might be actually.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, actually, I'd possibly. Yeah, I'd probably change my mind here, and I'd probably go from Rush with Love to Majesties. I know I'm on my own here, but they would be probably my top 5 in a row. Or if I went from Majesties to Spy Who Loved Me, but then I think probably the earlier 5 are better.
I think when you said From Rush with Love to Majesties, I suspect if we do have an audience watching this, I think an awful lot of them are probably were nodding their heads simultaneously with you. I think a lot of people would consider that to be the strong 5.
I mean, that's the thing that we're talking about. If you were talking objectively, then you're looking at this run of 5. Just like you said, there'll be a few people who would, with Majesties on there, would argue for that. I think most of them would also see You Only Live Twice as a weak link.
Yeah, a lot of them do, definitely.
But in fairness, you're gonna any run of 5 in any series. There's a weak link literally in that 5. So I think to say From Doctor No to You Only Live Twice is a great first 5 films. The fact that we've managed to pick some of these apart, it's really harsh.
Yeah,
I don't like picking James Bond apart. Not that I felt like we have tonight, but I think
it's within a very thin margin, isn't it? You're looking at basically 5. You may disagree. 5 sort of 7, 8, 9 out of 10 films.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, and the truth is that there's a reason why most film series never make it past 3 or 4 films.
Yeah.
Because they run out of ideas, or they run out of steam, or they start losing business too much.
Yeah.
And you know, it's amazing that we're not only talking about 5 very fine films within one franchise, but we're talking about a franchise that has gone on considerably longer than would have been expected back in the 60s. I don't think in his wildest dreams that Cubby Broccoli would be thinking in 2020 the latest Bond film would be released. One of the things that I think is notable about these 5 films in comparison, maybe not to the film that immediately follows with Majesties, but certainly, you know, Diamonds Are Forever onwards. If we're talking about, you know, dated attitudes and all that, I would say that I think the women characters in general are better written and are better drawn and more interesting in these 5 films than in the 5 films that are to come. And I think that's curious, because you would expect them to have built on the quality. You would expect the oldest films to be the more antiquated. Actually, it's the ones that kind of come in the era next, the decade next, that feels the most antiquated.
Although
in my opinion,
I think Tracy might be the exception.
Yes, well, you know, she is a very interesting. I have my problems with that character, but she's a very interestingly written character, and she's brilliantly acted.
I didn't say interesting. Yes, you know.
But that's an interesting point, because you know the whole women's liberation movement was picking up pace in the 60s, and in the 70s you'd expect the women characters to be more fully, you know, fleshed out, but in the Bond films they were probably stronger in the 60s. I agree. So it's a weird
Well,
thing.
the Doctor No was written by a woman, wasn't it? So you're going to have that. You're hopefully going to have that sort of female influence in there.
Maybe that's what the 70s lacked, perhaps.
The one thing that I do think was very smart about the 70s is that the 60s, these 5 films feel like they are creating a whole new genre of cinema. subgenre. They're creating the super spy movie.
Yeah.
This is Bond being first and foremost, and it's trailblazing, and it's everybody else is following Bond. What's interesting about the 70s, which we can discuss in more depth later, is that actually the 70s Bond is looking at other film trends and is picking up on them and is jumping on those bandwagons. And I think that was really smart because it kept it contemporary. So is that possibly why these 5 films are so strong in comparison to many of the others that come following, is because these are the most Bond films?
It was its own thing. Yeah.
I mean, I'd say that's particularly true of Goldfinger, even though they may not be the ones our favourite or the best. But Goldfinger through to You Only Live Twice. You could argue with the first. There's a lot of Hitchcock. There's a lot of elements of influence, but Goldfinger, which I argued against earlier and now regret, but Thunderball and You Only Live Twice are so confident, aren't they, as being what they are, almost just Bond on a roll and on top. They're absolutely fantastic, and I think, but I think you're right. What would have happened then? You can't just carry on making the same film over and over again. You have to put it in different contexts, and you have to go with the times. And unfortunately, by going with the times in the 70s, I think it reflected the things that you talked about. But in the 80s, by going with the times, some of the things in those times weren't that interesting. So maybe I don't know. Maybe that's why some of the 80s films didn't maybe have the different styles of the previous ones. I don't know.
Coming back to these 5 films, I do have a question for you all. We know that the series that Cubby and Harry originally wanted to start the movie with Thunderball, the series with Thunderball, but didn't. There was the legal battle going on, so couldn't do that. So then chose to go with Dr. No. But let's say Dr. No wasn't considered for the first film, and it went with From Russia with Love. Do you think the series would have been as impactful had the first Bond film been From Russia with Love in compared to the more exotic Dr. No?
No.
That's a really good question, Ian. I think so. I think no. I think it. Yeah.
I think the look of Jamaica and just the Ursula Andress scene, that must have seemed so out of this world at the time. They picked a really clever location, the colours. I just think for people watching that must have been like, a fantastic, globe-trotting experience. Whereas From Russia with Love, there were quite a lot of Cold War spy thrillers around at that time. And I think that Dr. No was the perfect one to start with, really. And I don't know maybe Thunderball would have been a bit more like Dr. No if it had been made first. Smaller and more sustained, and I don't know.
I can't see how they could have done Thunderball in the budget they had. That's always so. It would have been a more, I imagine, a more stripped back version of the story. But no, I mean, I agree. I think From Russia with Love is an excellent film, but it's an excellent second film to build on the character and to show we've done the kind of exotic globe-trotting, exotic Caribbean Bond. Now we're going to have the Cold War Russian Bond.
If you take it as not being, because obviously there's a lot of people who would have, I mean, I agree that it might have been great to see the books in the right order. But if you think about budgets and building up, the films make sense. You go from the relatively contained Dr. No to then you do the Cold War thriller, then Goldfinger's even bigger, then Thunderball they can afford to do, and that's even bigger, and then You Only Live Twice. It's just like, we're going to spend more on the riders for the cast than we did on Dr. No, and that sound stage is like From Russia with Love and Dr. No put together and all those other bits and pieces. Just think it's the way it goes.
I think that's what made Bond so popular in the 60s was that, it was not that long after World War II. And he had got a man who was literally travelling to these amazing locales, beautiful women, and there was just something in that sold it to the rest of the world.
And at a time when people in Britain, probably 95% were only going on holidays in Britain, and France or Spain or Italy would have been incredible. Suddenly you're looking.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're not just looking at a guy who's travelling to Jamaica, but gives the air of someone who would go there at any time. You know, it's only Jamaica this week, and you just think, oh, I want to be that guy.
No, I totally agree. I totally agree. And I think that's one of the reasons why you were talking about, you know, the wisdom or not of filming the novels in chronological order from when they were released. And I think it's one of the reasons why I suspect they were reluctant in adapting Moonraker, the novel, as it's written, because it all takes place in Britain.
Well, drop it, because I think it's because Kent's almost too exotic.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a certain type of exotic person that lives in Kent, clearly.
Well, yeah, I think they probably thought, well, outer space, fine, but if you actually go to Maidstone, for instance, which they do in that, or down to Dover, it would blow their minds.
I don't think audiences would have been ready for that. Yeah, they're probably not ready for it now.
If anything, they downscale.
I've stayed in that hotel in Maidstone, and that would have blown their minds. It's like the Overlook Hotel in The Shining. Honestly, I love the place. It's, but no, I think you're right about the books, because I think for me the earlier books weren't quite as strong, and obviously Casino Royale is just in one part of France, really. Yeah. You've Moonraker just in England. Live and Let Die wasn't a strong book, nor was Diamond Forever. And I think they did the right thing by going into the middle of the whole series and getting something that was exotic. And that's what, you know, Fleming did some great exotic writing. And I think the films, it made sense for them to go to places like Jamaica, the Bahamas, and Istanbul. I think they got the order. It made sense.
So going on what we're saying here, then, it's incredibly confident of the producers to land straight in the middle of a series, and like we've already touched on, here is a character who knows exactly what he's doing. They didn't feel like they needed to sort of show a 5-minute sequence of him becoming James Bond. But I think that's an incredibly confident decision.
But then that's what made Casino Royale in 2006 so different, is that they did bother, and I kind of like that. You know, I don't like it as much as some of the other Craig films, but to do you know, and I know you got Batman Begins and things like that, but to do an origin story of a series that's that established was quite a brave thing. It's quite a brave thing to do.
That was just as brave, yeah.
I don't know how big these recording files can be, so I think we're probably going to have to call it a night, because I don't want to do something that's so enormous that then I can't send it to Joe to edit. But
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for inviting me.
I'll do now a very brief. So thank you to my co-host Ian Lasky.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to Ian Douglas.
Thank you.
You weren't too robotic, just a bit. And to our special guest James Scott, thank you ever so much. And we'll be
thank you for having me
on the show. So thank you ever so much, and take care, chaps.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
Cheers, guys.